Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Romans Education Part 7, and this is going along with the notes for sessions 39 and 40. And as you can tell, we're going to be talking about the method of Satan's works of darkness and that first category of Satan's works of darkness. And we're going to be doing a lot in the second session as well, as we cover 41 and 42 there. So let's just jump right into it and take a look at the verse in Romans chapter 13 and verse 12. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. That's the godly thinking aspect of the verse. We've been all through that. Now we come to the godly living aspect. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness and let us put on the armor of light. We're going to concentrate on that first phrase, let us therefore cast off the works of darkness. Now, the last time, and you've got some things, now you should have a note taker. That is for the second session, and you should have a timeline. That is for both sessions. And on that timeline, you should see something that looks very similar to this. There's 3 of these, and we're going to be filling these in as we go. And we learned last time that there are 3 categories of the works of darkness. You've got and they are filled in at the top with each of those. Those are the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. We were over in 1 John chapter 2 looking at the warning and the exhortations that are be given to the believing remnant when they're going to be out in on that part of your timeline as you look at that that zenith of when the darkness of this world at the end of the extension of mercy. At the end of that extension of mercy, the world had done exactly what Psalm 2 said they would do. The world and Israel came together to say, let us break their bands asunder and cast their cords from us, and the total repudiation of God happened at that time. And then we had this dispensation of grace that takes place that we're presently living in, and when that is over, the remaining portion of Satan's night is going to be taking place before we go into the Lord's day. Well, I say we, but before the world goes into the Lord's day of wrath. And so what Peter did in 1 Peter chapter 2 is he is talking to the members of the believing remnant of Israel who are going to be living out here after the blessed hope, after the rapture takes place, and Satan has his finest hour. He brings everything to the point that he wants to bring it to. They're going to be in the midst of a desperate situation. They're going to be standing in stark contrast to not only the apostate nation of Israel and the Gentile nations, but Satan's man of sin will be there. The darkness is going to be great, and the pressure is going to be on them. And so they're warned about the 3-phased attack that is actually going to be brought against them at that time. And it is there that John actually gives these 3 categories. And the thing I wanted to remind you of was that these categories are not just meant to be categories that we can just list every sin and put them into these categories, because it is not talking about sin in general. It is talking about those very specific works of darkness, which are the very things that Satan is using to bring the world to the point that he needs it to come to. And so we looked at those in our last session, but just to look at that, and by the way, that's the way it's going to be out there, but just to back up and take a look at it from a little different perspective on the timeline, we realized that before, Satan had successfully produced the world of the ungodly. He started that process in the garden, and what you're going to see first off today is that it is all the way back to the garden that Satan is actually utilizing these 3 categories of works of darkness. Now, what's the difference between the works of darkness and just regular sins in general? First of all, the works of darkness are changing the world. They're producing something. They are specifically designed to replace what God has in this world with Satan's counterfeit. And they're designed to make people discontent with and want to throw off the things that God has put into place and embrace Satan's darkness. These are the works that are made to do that. And I'm just to kind of give you a foretaste of things to come, is something I just didn't realize when I was first, kind of coming to understand all of this, that if there's three categories, Bob, you can't answer this. If there's three categories of works of darkness, why? And I described it to you this way, and I'll just remind you of it again. Just think of Satan has come to a table in which every ungodly and wicked and sinful and evil, everything is out on the table, and he didn't just gather those up and divide them into three categories. He is selectively, because remember I told you not every work of darkness is a sinful thing, but not every sinful thing is a work of darkness. And so he is looking at everything that is before him that is able to. I'm just looking around the room, suddenly I'm just noticing who's here. Okay. Every work of darkness, everything that's out there on the table, he is selecting on purpose because of its ability to cause men to respond in a certain way. And for those works of darkness, ability to produce something in the world. And so because of that, he has gathered them up, and then he has put them into three categories. Now just think with me for a minute, why? Why would he have put those into three categories? I mean, you have the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, and you would think if he just gathered up all those, and by the way, God shows a special hatred and disdain and abhorrence for those works of darkness. And they're going to be judged specifically out in the Lord's day of wrath. Okay, you're thinking in threes, okay? And you're thinking the counterfeit of godliness, thinking, living, and laboring. But those are not it. You're thinking good, you're thinking in threes, and that's good. That's beyond what I was first doing. I just said, oh, well, there's three groups of them, and there you are. But if there's three groups of them, what do you know has got to be true? If a guy, okay, now you're, and Ron is thinking again in threes. Let's look at this. When a guy comes to do a job, is he likely to have more than one tool in his toolbox? Why does a guy have more than one tool? Oh, that's exactly right. Different tools do different things. Power saws and hammers do something different from each other. And what Satan has is he essentially has three main tools that are comprised of singular things. Here's why. Because, and this was a revelation to me. I hope it will be to you. We won't get to the details of it for several Tuesdays yet, but just so you know it's out there. Each one of these categories of works of darkness are going after something very specific. And they're not doing the same job. What the pride of life is going after is very different from what the lust of the eyes works of darkness are going after. And Satan has, for all intents and purposes, let's put it this way, there is something, let's put it like this, and for now, in a general relationship to God, Satan has discovered that thing rests on three pillars. And each one of those categories is going after one of those three pillars. So that all three of them take everything out from under that. And these are designed to not just tear these pillars down, but replace them with Satan's alternative. That's what these works of darkness are designed to do. So what we're going to have to do is come back, after we identify the works of darkness and begin to see what they are, what we want to do is we want to come back and see what are these pillars and what are these categories replacing and what are they replacing it with. And by the way, when you see this, all you have to do is look around in the world and you're going to go, oh my goodness, that's taking place right now. And you'll be able to see it. Well, anyway, with that in mind, kind of where we were, and Satan went back in the pre-flood world, and he used these same three categories in the garden. He used them to produce the world of the ungodly, and that's not just a derogatory phrase. That's actually the condition that the world got into. And just to make sure that we all understand this, you understand that ever before in the timeline, right here at the end of the extension of mercy, here's the cross. Here's that 1 year extension of mercy. You remember Jesus comes on the scene and begins his public ministry. Here's John the Baptist, on the timeline, and you're coming along and Jesus dies on the cross. There's that year extension of mercy. And then you have Peter writing over there in Acts 4. We covered all this, okay? So I'm not going to just go back to the details. But he quotes Psalm 2, and he says, and this is happening, what was talked about back there, where the Gentiles in Israel have taken counsel together to cast off the Lord and His Christ. Psalm 2 said the Lord and His anointed. Remember that? And so that all came to pass, which meant that Satan had now gotten the world to a place where he could actually do the thing that he was trying to get to all along. Now my point is this. Before that happened, were there evil men in the world? If you go back into Israel's program, even before Jesus showed up, were there wicked men in the world? Were they doing wicked things? Were they doing ungodly things? Yes. So that is not, here's my point, that's not what makes the world of the ungodly. The world of the ungodly is not because you have some ungodly people doing some ungodly things. It's been like that since way back. What makes the world into becoming the world of the ungodly? I need you to understand this issue. I'm sorry, say it again, Francis.
Men that work with Satan.
All right, men that work with Satan, that false doctrines. Those are good answers, but that's not.
Set up in leadership positions all over the world. That's part of the area.
These are all pieces of it. You're all. The question is, what is it? What is it that when you look at the world and say it has finally become the world of the ungodly, what makes it the world of the ungodly? It is not simply there's some wicked men doing some ungodly things. That's always been the case. That's a good. Here, let me just give you the answer. The world becomes. Lily says, "Thank you." The world becomes the world of the ungodly when Israel as a nation and the world at large decides they no longer want God. It's the repudiation. That's why we went through those steps. Before Jesus, they had already said no to the Father. The Son comes and here he is. The Son comes and what do they do with Him? They crucify Him. And John bears record. He came, the world was made by Him, and He came into the world, and the world what? Knew Him not. And then He came unto His own, and His own what? Received Him not. So they rejected the Father, they rejected the Son. What happens right after the cross? They're there for 40 days. Jesus ascends back to the Father, and He says, tarry at Jerusalem. He said, because I'm going to send the Spirit not many days hence. 10 days later, on the day of Pentecost, what happens? The Spirit comes, and there is one in this extension of mercy, this 1 year that Jesus spoke about in the book of Luke. When He talked about this under the administration of the Spirit, there is one more opportunity being given to the nation of Israel to believe that the historical Jesus of Nazareth was their prophesied Messiah and Christ. Did the nation receive that testimony? No. In fact, they were given in that time, and the book of Acts records it in chapters 1 through 7, 3 honest opportunities to change their mind. Each of those opportunities accompanied by an undeniable miracle that substantiated the message that Jesus, Peter says it, this same Jesus whom ye have crucified, God hath made both Lord and Christ. That's the message. And they got 3 opportunities. And the first time they slapped him on the wrist and said, don't preach in that name anymore. The second time, They beat him and throw him in prison. The third time, Stephen is preaching it, the third opportunity, and what do they do to him? They kill him. Increasing hostile rejection to the message. And now, at the end of the extension of mercy, all three members of the Godhead have been repudiated by both Israel and the world has once again become the world of the ungodly. Everybody with me here? All right. And at that point, God now has already said what He's going to do to that world of the ungodly. In the day of the Lord, He is going to pour out His wrath without mixture. But instead of doing that, because of something God made a provision for through His Son on the cross, He actually changed the status of the world. Because of something His Son did, He was able to do this. He didn't just sweep it all under the rug. He actually made a real provision to change the status of the world from being the world of the ungodly to now putting the world in the position to be reconciled unto Him. And what does Paul say when he talks about this? He says, hereby we preach the word of reconciliation. Why is he calling it that? Because God temporarily, yes, He interrupted His program with Israel. And when He did that and brought the world into a status of being reconciled to Him, Satan was prohibited from bringing in his Christ and the remaining portion of His night. And so God now has been reconciling the world unto Himself for the past 2,000 or so years. But when this is over, whenever this dispensation of grace is over, and I don't know when it'll be over, and the devil doesn't know when it's going to be over, and those guys on the internet don't know when it's going to be over. I know what they do. They all want to tie it, because the rapture and the last trump, to the Feast of Trumpets in Israel's program. Man, if there's one thing you should understand about the difference between the programs, is that God's not running anything today on Jewish feast days. Okay, well, thank you for that. Okay, Carson, I wish we'd have thought about that. We could have wrote a book on that, and okay. So my point is, when all of this is over now, and God has accomplished His purpose in the dispensation of grace, and then raptures every reconciled person out at the same time, there's nobody left in the world but the lost. And now God will change the status of the world right back to where it was right here. Let us break their bands asunder and cast their cords from us. And now Satan is going to have the remaining portion of that night to work that, and the world has already become the world of the ungodly. But during this dispensation of grace, because God changed that and offered salvation as a free gift to Jew and Gentile. Remember, He broke down that middle wall of partition, and the Jew dropped down, and God allows them both to be reconciled to Him in one body. And you know what? And Satan now is working with those same works of darkness in this dispensation of grace, because what he needs to do is extinguish the light and get his darkness to the blackest point it can be, so that when this dispensation of grace is over, it is one natural step to go from here to what he wants to accomplish right here. So with all of that in mind, that Paul is saying to us, in view of the night is far spent and the day is at hand, let us therefore cast off the works of darkness. Folks, that is what real spiritual warfare is. It is not all this other stuff. That if you can't identify the works of darkness, and you can't say how to cast them off according to what your apostle has taught you, you have not affected the adversary one iota. This is where it really is. This is the difference between talking about it and doing it. And so here we are. All right, now, I spent way too long on that, so I needed you to be sure, though, about what it is that makes the world of the ungodly. And so Satan is working in the world during the dispensation of grace to bring it back to the blackest point that it can be. And those works of darkness are designed to do that. Now, Satan has wisdom. We know he was created with wisdom, but he was not omniscient. And because he is not omniscient, he doesn't know everything. But just because his wisdom was corrupted by reason of his brightness doesn't mean that he doesn't know some things. He can still use his wisdom in opposition to God. And I'm going to tell you something else about Satan's wisdom. It took him observing man one day to figure out the psychology of men and how to get them to rebel against their Creator. Now that is somebody that's paying attention and has a plan. And what he did is he designed these exact categories of works of darkness to do their work. And so to do that, let me take you to it in Genesis chapter 3. And I asked the question, didn't realize I put it on the PowerPoint. All right, we answered that. And so let's go to this next one, Trent. No, back up. Let me do that because I got carried away and wasn't looking at the notes. Through this, Satan is constructing a system that does two things. The first thing it does is oppose God and his purposes in the world. But it's not enough to just oppose God. It also has to assist Satan in his plan of evil to be like the Most High. Can I just say a word about that just for a moment? I'm going to do this later in a more detailed way, but I want to get your thinking about that. He didn't say, I want to be the Most High. He said, I want to be like the Most High, because Satan knows he can't get rid of God. He cannot destroy the Creator. He knows that. Actually, maybe I'm wrong, but I think there's actually something in there about the fact that if the Creator could be destroyed, the creation would cease to exist. So I think it's kind of self-defeating if that's what you're going to do. Satan is smarter than that. He knows he's not going to do that. What he wants to do is he wants to have his peace that he will rule over and be like the Most High. Again, I'm going to say more about this later. He would really be content if God would just go off and rule over his part and let him rule over his part. That's really what he's after. We already know, though, that God is not going to just say, okay, well, I'll just go off and do my thing over here and let you have that. That's not the way that's going to work. Okay, so with all of that in mind, that system is doing that. Now, take a look in Genesis 3:1. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made, and he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, You shall not eat of it, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. That is the alternative thinking. And it says, verse 5, For God doth know that in the day that ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw, and on your chart, here's how you're going to write it. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, there's the category of the lust of the flesh, and that it was pleasant to the eyes. And there's the lust of the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise. There's the pride of life. She took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also to her husband with her, and he did eat. And I may have that on the PowerPoint. Is that chart actually on the PowerPoint? It is. All right, go ahead and just run me through to the end of that. There you go, right there. So this is what this is about, the methodology that Satan is employing to get this done. He used this in the garden, and by the way, when she took of the fruit and ate, do you think Satan was surprised, or do you think he planned for that? You know he did. He expected that to be the result. I mean, man shows up on the 6th day, and on that 7th day, here he is, and he knows exactly what he needs to put in front so that they will rebel against the command of God. By the way, a tree to be desired to make one wise. Wasn't God going to educate them himself? You know what this is? This is the alternative. This is what I talked about. Opposing God and assisting with what Satan is doing. And so what we have here is, if we take what John said a while ago when he said, oh, it's those three components to godliness. Well, let's do those components right here. If you're talking about think like God, here's what Satan has. He has an alternative thinking. And by the way, that's more important than you think it is. What's going to be promoted in this world, and we're going to see this, is this idea that, you know what, that Bible stuff is old-fashioned. We're smarter than that now. Why we're ahead of that. Bible's archaic. It's in fact, it's kind of narrow-minded. You know, we're much more open in our thinking, and because of that, we're so much smarter. And this society is way more advanced than that Bible. That might have been good for medieval days, but not in today's advanced society. And let me just put it in the jargon of the day, with all of our tech gear and all of the expertise that we have in media. I mean, you know what? We're just moving ourselves, and here's what men are going to do. I'm saying it to you this way, and I'm going to show it to you in the Bible. Men are coming to a point through the course of this world to where they're going to look at where they are, and they're going to say, look how far we've come, and we don't need the Bible for any of this. We don't need that. One step closer. And guess what? There are works of darkness that are specifically designed to get that alternative thinking going in them. Because that alternative thinking is going to attack a very specific area. Actually, I should say the category that winds up in is going to attack a very specific area. The next one is, we talk about godly living, doing things our Father's way. And what Satan is going to produce now is an ungodly conduct and behavior. We're going to reject that in favor of that alternative. Yes, I'm speaking to you in very broad terms now, but that will do for now. And we're going to take laboring with our Father in what He is doing, and men are now going to labor with Satan toward the ultimate achievement of his plan of evil to be like the Most High. That's where the world is going. That's what's being produced by these works of darkness. And I said it was by the course of this world, so give me that Ephesians. Did we pass it up, or did I not have it in the PowerPoint, Trent? There should be there. Wherein in time past you walked according to the course of this world. And what you have to understand is, because when Adam fell, man became the possession of the adversary. What allowed him to do is to chart a course for this world. Walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. In other words, he's the one that's behind that course. And that course, and we're going to find this out, we're going to talk more about the course of this world. I know we've mentioned it before, and we really haven't seen a whole lot about it, but we are going to get a chance to actually look at that. All right, so that terminology, and by the way, on your chart down at the bottom, you've got a couple of things down there. You've got some, you've got a little train down there at the bottom. You got a 1 and 2 down there. Let me give you the 1 and 2 that goes on there, because actually what Satan is doing today through the course of this world is his works of darkness are not only fueling his night, but they're also fueling the course of this world. Now, let me just say something, and then we're going to fill some things in on that train, because I think that's a really great illustration that is going to show us exactly how all of this fits together in this total plan that Satan has going. Now, of course, everything Satan has done, God has responded to. And so you know what he's had to do? He's had to adapt, and he's had to create certain policies of evil in order to adjust and to stay on track with what he's trying to get accomplished. And we understand that. Okay, so when you come to this train is actually the train of Satan's ungodliness. Now, there's a lot of things on that train. Now, I'm not trying to make Bob jealous with my artwork here, but let me just give you a few things here. All right. And so we're going to fill some things in on this train. First of all, the Jewish nation is on this train, and there's been a time in Israel's program when they were the focus of that. The Gentiles were a focus, but in a different way, and now during the dispensation of grace, both of those are still in view because that's what God is dealing with. He is also dealing with the nations, and whereby He can create a culture and a society that actually works hand in glove with His policies of evil. And then in those cars somewhere, it's just sin in general. It's all along for the ride. I mean, these are people, these are nations. You know, they're involved in that. But what's really at the front of this is a locomotive now that's pulling all of this. And what's in that locomotive is this. I'm going to abbreviate it, and if you don't remember what the abbreviation is, you can write it out. But it is the works of darkness. That's what's fueling the engine of that train to get that thing running down the tracks. And when that thing is running down the tracks, you know where they're running? The tracks are running according to the course of this world. And who charted the course? Satan did. Well, look, if you have a train and you want it to go somewhere, you know what you do? You lay the track where you want the train to go. It follows the track. Satan has laid a course for this world. And everything about his works of darkness that are pulling all the rest of this. Now, up here in this engine room with the works of darkness are those wicked men who are actually openly and willingly participating with Satan in what he is doing. Back here sitting in the cars are people, they're just along for the ride. They don't even know, they may not even know where they're headed, but they're on the train. And so here we go, and it's headed down the course of this world. And you know where the final destination is? The world of the ungodly. And so what are the things that are actually showing up now on this? The first thing is, here's what that course of this world is designed to do. The first thing is to fend off God. In other words, any attempt that God will make to try to counter what Satan is doing, those works of darkness and the effects of the course of this world make it so that a man gets more and more immune to the activity of God to win that man over. And the second thing it does is it allows him to work for Satan. This is just a little bit of a turn of phrase from what I told you a while ago when I said, it is opposed to God and His purposes, and we wind up laboring with Satan. But I want to say it this way because it is more than just being opposed to God. It is actually now equipping men that when God does something in order to reach those men, they can repel that. And the light doesn't have an effect on them the way that maybe it should. Okay. And by the way, when we talk about sin, and I just want to bring this up because this used to be an old theological debate, and every once in a while I still hear someone say it, and they say, well, sin is sin. Brother Mike, you're talking about works of darkness being worse than other sins, and they are. And someone said, well, sin is sin. Sin is sin if you're talking about justifying yourself. Yeah, any sin will disqualify you. But if you're talking about what God hates, I'm going to show you scriptures whereby He hates these works of darkness way more than He hates those other things because of what they produce. Anybody that thinks one infraction is equal to another, well, you know what? One's just as bad as another. You don't believe that, not for a minute. You think the murderer is the same as the guy that rolled through the stop sign. Really? You think they deserve the same penalty? Well, that'll sure keep me from rolling through the stop sign. But I'm saying you know better than that. Those infractions are of varying degrees. That's why we have things called misdemeanors for more minor offenses, right? Don't get to thinking, well, true, when you're talking about trying to justify yourself, every sin is equal in that it will disqualify you. All you need to do is fail once and you're done. But when you're talking about God judging sin, He is specifically pointing out these works of darkness because they are producing something and doing something that the other sins in general cannot do. So they have a particular iniquity quality to them that God hates. And He'll talk about it that way. Okay, with that said, what I want to do now is take you over to 1 John chapter 2, where we started out, where we talked about those works of darkness there. And he says, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the thing I want to emphasize to you here is when he says, for all that is in the world, he's talking about this. He's talking about these three categories of the works of all that's in the world. He is not talking about sin in general. Besides, if you know where you are in 1 John chapter 2 and what he's warning them about, he's not warning them about just the little sins that people commit on a daily basis. He's actually talking about these specialized works of darkness that are actually destroying what God is establishing and replacing it with a counterfeit. And not every sin does that. Because one of the things those things are doing is extinguishing the basic light in the world. Okay, don't lose me here. They're extinguishing the basic light in the world of who is the true and the living God. Let me ask you a question. Do Christians commit sins? Does that mean they're going to quit believing in God? No. Not every sin extinguishes that light. These works of darkness are made to extinguish even the light of who is the true and living God, so that men now begin to do what they did before, to worship the creature more than the Creator, to make idols unto themselves. Those are what the product of the works of darkness. And so there are some particular lusts that are of the flesh, some particular lusts that are of the eyes, and some particular prides that are of life that are sitting right up here, driving the engine, fueling the engine that pulls the whole train down the course of this world. Okay, so now, and by the way, if we can't be aware of these works of darkness, you know what Satan will have us doing? Because he knows how we're built. He'll have us majoring on minors. He'll have us picking out little sins, and man, we'll go after them with gusto, and we'll feel like we're fighting a good fight, and Satan is laughing his head off because he realizes that the real work that he's doing in this world is completely unaffected by all that. What he is doing goes unobserved. So that's why it's important for us to identify those works of darkness. If we're going to cast them off, we need to know what they are. Well, now let's talk about the Lord's day of wrath and Satan's works of darkness in connection with that. We know that God is going to judge some things out here in His day of wrath. He's going to judge the apostate nation. He's going to judge the Gentile nations. He's going to judge the man of sin. And He is also going to judge Satan's works of darkness. And since that's the last one we mentioned on purpose, that's the one I want us to talk about. Because God's judgments against Satan's works of darkness are very precise. When you look at the judgments of the tribulation, those things are not willy-nilly. They are specifically designed to go after each of these categories of the works of darkness. Before we get away from here today, I'm going to show you how, sitting all the way back in the prophets took each one of these categories and talked about them being judged in the day of the Lord. And I'm going to show them to you. And when I show them to you, I won't even tell you what category they go in, and you'll identify them. Now, that's how plain it will be. And so when we look at what Satan is doing in the day of wrath, what God is doing against Satan in the day of wrath by those judgments and against his works of darkness, those things are designed to go after those works of darkness. Just like the works of darkness are designed to go after something God has done, God has some judgments to go after those works of darkness specifically. And I want to give you an example of this. Just bring to your remembrance the things that were happening back over in the book of Exodus when the plagues fell on the Egyptians. God did not look at that and go, well, let's do this. Let's have some frogs and some flies, and I'll kill the firstborn. We'll see how that goes. He's not just dreaming stuff up. In Exodus chapter 12, God says something very revealing. He says, I'm going to bring judgment, I'm going to quote here, against all the gods of Egypt. They worshipped frogs. So God said, oh, you think those frogs are gods? Why don't I do this? Why don't I just bring them out till they cover you up? And then when you've been covered up with them till you're so sick, they couldn't even drink water without the frogs being in it. And he says, and when you get sick of that, I'll kill them. And then you'll pile them up in heaps, and they will stink you out of your homes. And I'm going to show you what I'm going to do to your gods. See, to us, that didn't mean much. We read a story about the frogs, and we thought, oh yeah, God was really getting them. Did you ever think to yourself, why is he doing that to frogs? Not like a frog is an especially vicious thing. I mean, you don't ever see one in your front yard and go, oh my God, get the shotgun, it's a frog. Now, out where we are, we do that with rattlesnakes. See, I'd like to see that on the Egyptians, but evidently they didn't worship the rattlesnake. They worshiped the frog and the fly. And so you know what? God says, I'm going to show you how your gods stack up to me. And he's doing things in that. For the Egyptians, they're watching their gods one by one paraded before them in abject failure. By the way, can Pharaoh's magicians do anything to reverse those judgments? Absolutely not. And so God parades that, and he's doing some other things too. You know what else he's doing? He's building a testimony in his people that, you know what, if you'll let me, I will provide for you what you need. He's doing something else too. He is building a testimony of doing all of this to the Egyptians so that when his people come out, every nation will be scared to death of them. And did that happen? Oh, you remember when the spies were up there with Rahab and she said, when we heard you were coming, we were all scared to death. That's exactly what God was producing in that. The Egyptians got a message. If you were an Egyptian, when Israel left, not only are you thinking, thank God they're gone, but you're also thinking, you know, our gods didn't do too good against Israel's God. That's what that was designed for. The judgments were specific. That's the point I'm making. The judgments out here are specific. Yes, there's judgments against the Antichrist. There's judgments against the apostate nation. There's judgments against the Gentiles. And then there's judgments against the lust of the flesh, works of darkness, the lust of the eyes, works of darkness, and the pride of life, works of darkness, because God's going to single them out. And if you thought those were so great, he's going to absolutely destroy them in the day of wrath. They're going to be, when it starts, we'll read it in a few weeks, a few months now. We meet every other week, but you're going to read a deal where they go, they're going to hear about what God is going to do, and And they basically say this, we'd like to see that. They actually tell God to get on with it. Oh, you think you're going to do all that? Well, then do it now. Let's see you do it now. But when it's over, it says they're hiding in the rocks, in the caves, and they're casting their idols to the bats. Oh, this is not going to be good for them. Okay, so let me move on from this. But the point I'm making is, in the judgments of the day of wrath, those things are going to be very specific. And by the way, that's not an unimportant thing, because if we're going to walk honestly as in the day, you're going to have to know some things about the judgments that are going on in the day of the Lord's wrath, because that's part of your godly labor. So that's why I say that's not an unimportant thing. Okay, where are we? Okay, I think we're okay. We're doing good here. So, to advance our understanding of Satan's works of darkness and to continue to put the things on the list that we need to identify, what we're going to do now is we're going to have to go back into Israel's program, because that's where they're mentioned. And when Paul talks about works of darkness, if you've already seen the things that are before, you've already seen those things, and you know what's going on with that. We didn't do it that way, so we're going to have to go back and look at them. And as we get ready to do that, you're going to see some passages that we've already looked at, a couple of them, but we didn't look at this issue. So now we're going to be looking at something else that's tucked away in these passages. And now you could see that all through Israel's program. But because these are going to reach their zenith out in the remaining portion of this night, and the Lord is going to be targeting those in His day of wrath, what I want to do is I want to take you to the passages in the Old Testament that deal with that final installment in the fifth course of punishment, because that's when those things come to their zenith. And it's real easy to identify in those cases, because that's the context of what's going on there. Now, in order to do that, I need to tell you something here about the prophets, because we're going to be going back to the prophets. And so let me just, can you back me up one? There you go. No, back me up. No, back me up again. Do I not have one that says Isaiah? Does that take your timeline out? No, that's not it. Just leave it right there. That's fine. Let's do this. Take your timeline out, and you've got a place on there. There's colored squares that come down through that increasing darkness of Satan's night. The yellow one, it says the 70-year captivity there. Underneath that expanding darkness, write this: Isaiah to Zephaniah. Z-E-P-H, Zephaniah. Isaiah to Zephaniah. Because from Isaiah to Zephaniah, all of those prophets are prophesying either before the start of the fifth course of punishment, or they're during the first installment. And you know guys that are in both of those. For instance, Isaiah is actually in the fourth course of punishment. Well, I say the fourth, I should say the third. But he's actually, I'm sorry. He's not in the first course, he's back in the fourth course of punishment, talking about the fifth course is about to come upon them. So he's before that. Some of these, though, are right in the first course of punishment, which is the 70-year captivity, such as Daniel. You remember? Daniel, he's already over there, and he's praying, and he's saying, Lord, is this going to be it, or is there any more? And he's doing that. So Isaiah to Zephaniah goes in that first bright yellow block. In the next block, which is slightly orange, my wife thinks I'm colorblind, so I'm just calling it's the next block, whatever that is. Then write these. What is it not orange?
No, I just said peach. That's what it went.
Peach, okay. All right, I can go with that. All right. Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. Those are the three prophets that do not write until the second installment of the fifth course of punishment. Everybody with me? Look, here's the way I was taught in Bible college to divide the prophets. Major prophets and minor prophets. You called them major prophets because they were the big ones, and the minor prophets, they were always sure to say, not because they weren't important, but their books were smaller. Okay, all right. If you want to look at them and go, here's the big ones and here's the little ones, fine. I think there's a better way to divide the prophets because of what's being talked about. There are prophets that write before or during the first installment of the fifth course of punishment, and then there are the last prophets that write are writing in the second installment, which, you know what? They're not going to talk to you a whole lot about the first installment, are they? Because it's already behind them. So there's a division, and we're going to do more about that in the next session. But in the few minutes I have left here, let me just see if I can't get us on down here. You understand that when they got to, and I don't have a timeline up here that's complete enough, but when they got to that fifth course of punishment, that was a turning point. If they go into that first installment, you remember the fifth course had 5 installments. They don't know that at first. But here's what they do know, and Satan knows it. If he can get them cast out of the land in that fifth course of punishment, that thing is going to run all the way to the end, because that is a point of no return. They're not going to do anything. It's going to result in that final fifth installment that's going to be out there. Satan knows if he can get them cast out of the land, Israel becomes his lawful captive. He can set up his base of activities in the land of Israel. And here's what else he knows. He will come to the ultimate end of his night. I don't mean the end and it's going away. I mean the end of what it was designed to produce at the end. And he knows that. And so he is working to get them to that fifth course. The prophets are warning about that. Of course, they don't pay any attention to that. And so I'm just giving you the conditions that are in play here as they get ready to go into that fifth course of punishment. Now, Isaiah is going to detail. Well, this is great. I'm going to end right on time. Isaiah is about to detail all 3 categories. When we come back after the break, I'm going to take you to Isaiah chapter 2, Isaiah chapter 3, and Isaiah chapter 5. And I'm going to show you something about all 3 of these categories. And Isaiah is going to take each one of those chapters and highlight just one of these categories in each one of those chapters. And he's going to do it in the first 5 chapters of the book. And there's a reason for that. So this is what we'll pick up on when we come back. So we'll stop here, take our break, and then we'll come back and go to the second session.